I was listening to an interview with Shia LaBeouf years ago. I don't know. I was listening to an interview with Shia LaBeouf years ago, and he was talking about how he likes movies about people, not so much movies about plot. Independent films tend to be more about people, the characters. That's what makes indie films a bit more offbeat, quirky, weird. People are offbeat, quirky, and weird. There's a lot of variation in people. A lot of interesting characters in the world. There are only so many plot points. Studio movies tend to be more about plot. What happens? That's more basic. The what happens story moving from plot point to plot point without any detours to investigate the character quirks of individuals. It's a different story. That's a different approach to making a thing. The plot-based what happens story is easier for a broader audience to latch onto if that's your goal. This explodes, so that happens next, right? There's a very clear cause and effect. A story about Jerome crying in his car after he buys paints at the arts and crafts store, that seems more like a Jerome thing. You know, what's going on with Jerome? I need more backstory on Jerome. Take me into Jerome's life in depth. That's the only way we're going to sort out why these paints were so triggering. But if a car explodes next to Jerome, Jerome's probably going to react how most people would react. The individual character quirk of crying when buying paints gets superseded by the demands of the major plot point of the car exploding. He can't just keep crying in his car over his paints. That doesn't make sense to us, to most viewers, right? So if you want an interesting movie about an individual that gets inside their mind and life in depth, maybe consider skipping the major, obvious, earth-shaking studio movie plot points. Maybe those are more valuable in making this film appealing, but less valuable in making it stand out and be more memorable. How is this relevant to stand-up comedy? You've got to put the personal into your act. You need to invest yourself. The setups and punchlines are plot points, but you want more flavor than that. You need a little zest. How are you going to stand out? There's a million stand-up comedians. Don't be so worried all the time about getting from A to B. That's important. Your movie still needs plot, right? Your movie still needs a plot. Your stand-up act still needs setup, punch. But it doesn't have to be the focus front and center all the time, right? If you want to give audiences something new and unique. Indie films have texture. You can give your jokes a texture. The way you approach and handle the topic can open up doors for you that wouldn't be available for another person or comedian to walk through. How do you do this? Write about people first. Let people be little adventurers in your jokes, kind of helping you play with an idea. Don't be so eager to jam, your critical plot points into the bit, your punch, setup, punch. This happens and this happens and this happens. Don't baby your audience like that. If you do, they'll never get any better as an audience. Audiences can get better. They can understand comedy more and laugh at new and interesting things that they wouldn't have laughed at before. You don't want your audience to stay comedy toddlers who only know, basic fart and fall down jokes, which are all important parts of your act at some point, probably. But stand-up can be a little disorganized. Sometimes critics pan indie films for a lack of plot, right? They meander too much. They don't know what type of film they are. Their themes are off. Your stand-up doesn't have to know what type of a film it is yet. It can meander, but keep writing about people. Keep injecting yourself into your material. Try to make stuff with texture and flavor. Don't sit down to write a story that starts here and ends there, okay? You will have to do that eventually, but it's better if you don't know where it starts and ends yet. If you don't know where it starts and ends, then neither does the audience, and in some ways, that's what makes it more interesting. We don't know when people start and end. People are more interesting than plot because they can always change their mind. They don't have to be consistent. We get mad at people when they aren't consistent. Those types of people, they frustrate us because we don't understand them and we can't predict them. But guess what? All of us, we're all those types of frustrating, inconsistent people. That's part of what makes us interesting, okay? Are our little quirks and inconsistencies. What I'm saying is, be a frustrating, inconsistent person, okay? Don't put yourself in a plot bottle. Be a frustrating, inconsistent person in your art and your work, your stand-up. Don't put yourself in a plot bottle where this has to follow this. Maybe the car explodes next to Jerome and he does just keep crying in his car over the paints, as if nothing else happened that matters. The paints are more important than the explosion. Maybe that makes the most sense in Jerome's world. I don't know, bit odd to the rest of us, probably, but more interesting. And I'm not saying be false, don't just make up weird, quirky crap for the sake of it. That's a bad indie film, okay? That's how you make a bad indie film. But when you encounter weird, quirky crap, don't shy away from it, okay? If it messes with your plot structure, good. There's plenty of weird stuff in this world that people shy away from talking about. That stuff is a feast when it comes to stand-up comedy. That is the most fertile ground for stand-up comedy. Make the odd, out-of-place stuff relatable by attaching it to people. Everyone can relate to another person, even if that other person doesn't seem relatable. They're still a person. So develop who you are on stage, your character on stage, if you will, the types of other characters you talk about, and then let the audience sort of see the weird, fertile, indie crap through those people and character lenses. Personally, I'm not in the business of making action movie stand-up. Maybe you are, but I'd encourage you not to be. There's plenty of people out there making action movie stand-up comedy. It's already being done, and I'm not going to convince any of them to change because they're more successful than all of us. But I want to see your indie film. That's more interesting to me.